Hi, I'm Merisa.
And I am Jordan. Today, Merisa and I will be discussing two different topics from the year 1907. But before we do that, we would like to announce that we have our very first subscriber on Patreon.
Celebrate good times.
So who is this patron, Merisa?
It is Cynthia Martinez.
Thank you very much, Cynthia Martinez. And I noticed that also she jumped over our tier 1 and got to our tier 2, which means she gets what?
She gets early access, a Patreon shout out, general support for us, and exclusive content.
And you can also get our tier 1, which is general support, early access, and a Patreon shout out like Cynthia just got. So this means that since she has tier 2, she is the only person in existence in this entire earth that gets to hear our 1776 special, the 4th of July.
That is correct. So if you want to be like Cynthia, go ahead and sign up to our Patreon.
Yes, and that's tier 2 for the bonus content. And if you just want to show support and get early access to our episodes, sign up for tier 1. So today, Merisa is going to start us off with...
Today I'm going to be speaking about the first law that was enacted in the entire world that allowed sterilization based on eugenics. So what is eugenics? According to dictionary.com, eugenics is the study of or belief in the possibility of improving the qualities of the human species or a human population, especially by such means as discouraging reproduction by persons having genetic defects or presumed to have inheritable undesirable traits, or encouraging reproduction by persons presumed to have inheritable desirable traits.
That's dark.
Yeah, they made it sound nice and presentable, but what it really means is that anybody in power can decide who can have children based on the way that people look, based on their habits, based on their traits, and based on their health. So what is sterilization? It's a medical procedure that prevents a person from reproducing. So that means you couldn't impregnate someone or somebody could not be impregnated.
Yeah, vasectomy, getting your tubes tied.
Yeah, or getting the tube snipped. Okay, so you're probably wondering at this point which country was the first to pass this law or pass this law based on eugenics. On March 9th, 1907, Governor Frank Hanley of Indiana approved the first eugenics law, which made sterilization mandatory for criminals, idiots, rapists, and imbeciles in state custody.
Whoa. Who gets to decide on who's what?
They just took the doctor's word for it.
Really?
Yeah. So the doctor would examine somebody and say, yeah, this person is an idiot or an imbecile.
Yeah. And this was in Indiana, you said?
Yeah, Indiana.
See, I was assuming Eugene, Oregon, but I don't know why.
Is there a place called Eugene, Oregon?
Yeah.
Oh, no, it's not Oregon. Or Eugene.
Well, eugenics, that's why.
Oh, okay. I see it. I'm sorry.
No.
See, I would have been one of the people that...
Well, there's people like you listening, so...
Huh?
Never mind.
All right. So how did this belief system come to be? It was actually made popular by Charles Darwin's cousin, Francis Galton, in his 1883 book, Inquiries into Human Faculty and Its Development. Francis Galton wanted to make humankind better by having only the British elite reproduce. So Jordan, that would have been out. Now, his plan didn't take off in his own country, but it was absolutely welcomed here in America. And as I stated before, the law in 1907 made it mandatory for certain people in state's custody to be sterilized, but eugenics did make its first appearance in America in 1896, when Connecticut made it illegal for people with epilepsy or feeble-minded people to marry. I don't know how they would diagnose feeble-mindedness, but they weren't allowed to marry. And in 1903, American Breeders Association was created, and it was the first scientific organization in the United States to support and study eugenic research. So it wasn't just crazy people promoting this belief system. It was actually scientists, doctors, that kind of thing. And as I said, it was becoming popular among scientists and elite Americans, and they actually championed the cause. And they established the Eugenics Record Office. The office tracked families and their genetic traits, and they claimed most people considered unfit were immigrants, minorities, or the poor. So me and you're out again. I'm out too. We're part of the undesirables.
And we still are.
All right, but the fun didn't stop there. From 1909 to 1979, California performed 20,000 sterilizations in their state mental institutions. And this was at a time when a husband can bring a wife in and say she's crazy, without any type of medical information. Yeah. So anybody who wanted to say was crazy, they were labeled as crazy because they're going to believe the husband over their wife. And as I stated before, there was a lot of people that were vocally supportive of this eugenics cause. And one of those people was John Harvey Kellogg.
I know that man.
Yes, that's right. The Tony the Tiger man.
And the Snip Snip man.
He actually organized the Race Betterment Foundation in 1911 and established a pedigree registry.
For people.
For people, yeah, not for animals, for people. But he wasn't the only person of importance that actually endorsed eugenics. We also had President Theodore Roosevelt, Alexander Graham Bell. You know who that is from episode 1902.
The phone guy.
Exactly. John D. Rockefeller Jr. These were all outspoken supporters. And surprisingly, we had Helen Keller, a person who couldn't hear, see, or talk.
And she agreed to that.
I didn't believe it at first because I was like, this isn't right. And then I actually read where she stated her support.
So she heard what they had to say and then signed the papers?
I think if she wasn't born into a wealthy family, she would have been one of the people they considered undesirable.
Yeah.
So I find it strange that she supported this movement. And there was another person of importance, but I honestly could not find anything where he publicly and vocally stated his support for eugenics. But he did have close ties to people that did. And that is Prescott Bush. And that's former President George W. Bush's grandfather and the other former President George H.W. Bush's father. And he worked at a firm that did direct business with Nazi financiers during World War II. So that means that they're helping Nazis with money. And it wasn't like a loophole, oh, we didn't know they were Nazis type of thing. Like they knew who they were helping them with money. And that firm, the Harriman family owned it. And the Harriman family also funded the establishment of a eugenics record office in New York. But Prescott Bush's connections don't stop there. He was actually golfing buddies with President Eisenhower, and that actually helped him get his friend William Draper appointed to a leader position in a committee to advise Eisenhower on military aid to other countries. Draper later refocused that committee to depopulating the expanding population of non-white countries. So, although I couldn't find anything that where he was public about his beliefs, but if it looks like a duck and it smells like a duck,
we don't give up.
In 1924, Virginia passed its sterilization law, and the first person to be sterilized under the new law was in 1927, and it was a poor white woman by the name of Carrie Buck. Carrie's mother had been involuntarily institutionalized for being feeble-minded and promiscuous. And the way I guess they would define promiscuous at that time was that if they came in because they had an STD, then...
Yep, you've been sleeping around, you're too much, you're uncontrollable.
Yeah, so, and since they were poor, it didn't matter that they were white, but as long as that they were poor, they were considered undesirable. So she was sterilized shortly after giving birth. And her case... Carrie Buck is who I'm talking about. Her case went all the way to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court ruled that forced sterilization for the handicapped does not violate the U.S. Constitution. And during this ruling, Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes stated, 3 generations of imbeciles are enough.
I always thought 8 was enough. That's all it takes.
Yeah, I thought it was kind of crazy because you would think that the Supreme Court would stop this type of behavior, but
yeah, they
did, although in 1942 overturn that ruling, but that was before thousands of people underwent the procedure. Also in 1924, an inspiring world leader stated in his book, "There is today one state in which at least weak beginnings toward a better conception of immigration are noticeable. And of course it is not our model German Republic, but the United States." And if you haven't guessed it yet, yes, I'm talking about Hitler. America inspired Hitler.
That is insane.
When I first heard that, I didn't believe it. I was like, okay, these people are exaggerating. There's no way.
Yeah.
And then I read that. And of course, they didn't inspire his hatred. He already had that hatred in him. That's something he created on his own. But he used the American outline of our eugenics program to help his outline of his eugenics program.
When you introduced the topic of eugenics, he was the first person to come to mind. So I'm not surprised that he's come up in this story.
Yeah, so he was a very big fan. And things like this didn't just end in 1942. It kept happening throughout the 19th century and even trickled into the 21st century. And I'll tell you about it in just a moment. In 1976, there was an investigation, and they found that between 25 and 50% of Native Americans were sterilized between 1970 and 1976. And they believe these sterilizations happened without consent during other surgical procedures, like getting your appendix taken out. They would also sterilize them. And in some cases, when they needed health care for their living children, they were denied unless the mother agreed to sterilization. So they were using their living kids as, a way to get them to stop reproducing. And also in the South, they would use these teaching hospitals, where doctors go to learn how to do procedures.
Yeah.
They would use women of color to show the doctors how to do these sterilizations.
Like lab rats?
Yeah, mostly without their consent.
So how did they get away with that? Like, how did they get them to agree to go into the hospital?
If they were getting a surgery done.
So they were getting something else they thought was getting done?
Yeah,
or?
like I said before, like taking their appendix out, for example, and then they would sterilize them.
I'm assuming they were put under for that.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And in 1974, Mary Alice and Minnie Ralph, there were two poor African-American sisters from Alabama. They were sterilized at the ages of 12 and 14. Their mother, who was illiterate, had signed an X on a piece of paper she believed gave permission for her daughters to receive birth control shots. So they tricked her. They told her it was for one thing and they did something else. And more recently, California, once again, leading the way. California prisons are said to have authorized sterilizations of nearly 150 female inmates between 2006 and 2010. The former inmates say they were done under coercion. Yeah, so they would just, I guess, maybe convince them to do it. Or maybe they didn't want to do it. I don't know, but they're doing it. And that was in 2006.
What?
And the youngest I read that had ever been sterilized was a 9-year-old. There's some pretty dark stuff.
That's very dark, yeah.
Yeah.
I didn't think you were going to get into the 2000s.
Right? I didn't think so. I didn't think I was going to get into eugenics in America.
At all.
Yeah, and it just happened. I'm like, what is going on? Because you hear these stories, but you kind of think that people exaggerate them, because people do that a lot.
Yeah, I always hear people, if not in person, on social media talking about, oh yeah, we should sterilize stupid people, kind of joking about it lightly, But for it to be a real thing and for it to be only in the United States, that's a bit insane.
And to be the inspiration for Hitler,
yeah,
that is really insane. That is craziness. And that's my unfortunate story. What are you talking about today, Jordan?
The topic I'm going to be talking about today is kind of a sequel from my last topic. So if you listen to 1906 episode, you'll notice that I talked about the San Francisco earthquake and fire of 1906. Now, I did talk about the people in Chinatown there and how, when I left off, everyone was homeless and they were in camps and stuff. So some of those Chinese people, because they felt ostracized in San Francisco, a small percentage of them went to another city. This city was in a different country, and it was called Vancouver, Canada.
Ooh.
So we had people coming from San Francisco, Washington, China, Japan, India to work on this railroad. Now, in 1907, they went there for new opportunities, but people have been going there for about 20, 30 years at that point to work on the railroad, the Transcontinental Railway, which was built in British Columbia. And the Canadian government hired 17,000 workers from China. The Canadians referred to them as coolies, which I'm assuming is a derogatory racial slur.
I would imagine so. That doesn't sound nice.
Coming from white people, giving them a nickname when they can simply call them Chinese people. They always have to give them a new name, right?
Yeah,
so,
exactly.
They can't call them what they are. So the white Canadians seem to tolerate the Chinese people better than the Americans because the Chinese people, they had a reputation of kind of laying low and they kind of stuck with the stereotypical jobs like unskilled labor, domestic service, doing laundry, things like that, right? Mm-hmm. Now, the Japanese, on the other hand, they were a different type of people. And they were a little bit more competitive and they were ready to compete with the white people when it came to fishing and farming and things like that. And even the ruling class of Canada became very suspicious of the Japanese because ever since the military was like growing and beating the shit out of everybody. Remember, like
1905.
yeah, 1905,
Russia.
they
Yeah.
defeated the Russian Empire. They also beat the Chinese and annexed the Koreans. So they were like kicking ass all over Asia and Russia. And, now they're coming to Vancouver, Canada. And so the Canadian government didn't really want to piss off the Japanese because they were afraid it would, create a conflict, which they didn't want. So, but they were also very skeptical about them being there. But the Chinese, they felt like take advantage of more. They really worked them to death with the railroads and all that and treated them like shit. So this is about the quote-unquote anti-Oriental race riot of Vancouver.
It's like the one I did for 1906. I call it the Atlanta Massacre because the way they worded it as a race riot, it wasn't.
Yeah, it was more of a massacre. Your one was.
Yeah, mine for 1906, that subject was a massacre.
Yeah, definitely a massacre. Mine's not so much of a massacre. It is more of a race riot.
Okay, it's a more appropriate for that event.
Exactly, yeah. I can call mine a race riot because it wasn't really a massacre. It was trying to be, but not really. It didn't really succeed. Your one, man, I was still thinking about that days after. I couldn't get out of my mind. That was probably the darkest episode we've done so far. Mm-hmm. But this was the quote-unquote anti-Oriental race riot, or modern day we call it the anti-Asian race riot. Now, this was started by a group called the Asiatic Exclusion League. This was an anti-Asian organization. I guess you can compare these to like maybe the KKK of Canada, but against Asian people. Yeah, okay. I mean that's the best way I came up with. It's a political group, anti-Asians. Sorry,
I don't think the KKK are for Asians though.
No. Okay. I'm saying in comparison.
Oh, okay. I see what you mean.
The way the American KKK are against blacks, this is the Canadian KKK against Asian people.
Their hatred towards them is more than other groups.
For sure. They target Asian people. Mm-hmm. It's the Asiatic Exclusion League, as they call themselves. So pretty much at this time, 88% of all the Canadians were of British or French descent. Mm-hmm. The Canadians encouraged the Chinese to migrate there because of the Transcontinental Railway. And so British Columbia hired 17,000 workers from China.
Wow.
And they were able to pay them half as much as they would pay the white man, which is why they encouraged them to come over here, to get more work out of less pay. Once the railroad was complete, they were done with them. They said, no, stop coming over. We don't need you anymore. Well, they kept bringing other people. Friends, family kept coming. They began putting a head tax on every person from China and Japan. They started off with a $50 head tax. And then by 1901, it raised to $100. And by 1903, they had a $500 head tax, which doesn't seem like a lot of money. But back then, that was about a year or two worth of wages.
Whoa. Yeah, because I'm sorry, I'm poor, but $500 is a lot to me. So
$500
and
admission
that's
fee.
In 2020 money. I can't imagine what that was like.
1907. Yeah. So they were pretty much not able to come over anymore because once they, got into Vancouver, hey, where's the $500? I don't have it. And then go back, Yeah. So they were able to control immigration. Now, of course, there's still European immigrants coming like nothing with no head tax on them. So obviously they stopped migrating, but the ones that were already there continued to develop and grow as a community.
Kind of like in San Francisco, they had their Chinatown.
Exactly.
Okay. And I'm assuming the Japanese had Japantown?
Yeah, of course. Yes, I was just about to get to that.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry.
No, you're fine. So the white people in Canada, especially the people in politics, were kind of looked at as social Darwinists. In other words, they were like white supremacists, but kind of respected white supremacists. Like everyone was kind of, we all agree that white people, we're the ones that get to rule this place and we get to control them. And they didn't see it as a racist thing. It's like, well, this is the way it is. We know what we're doing. We've got our government put together. So do as we say. So they had control and etc. So now I'm going to talk about the riot part. So the Asiatic Exclusion League, can I just call them the AEL?
Yeah.
Yeah, let's do that, right? They hated the Chinese people, the Japanese people, and the Punjabi Sikhs, which are the Indian people. Now, they had a big rally on September 7th, 1907. So the rally was pretty much an anti-Asian hate rally, right? They were getting people all riled up and a bunch of white people angry. They're taking all our jobs. And they really actually said things like that.
Oh, really?
Yeah, they called them the Yellow Peril and all these other racist signs and things they had. It's just a big hate group hating on people who they felt were taking their jobs, but they weren't taking their jobs. Much like politics today, when people say people are taking their jobs, they're not really taking their jobs. They're doing their own jobs. So everybody gets angry and all riled up. And then the speeches begin to get physical. They start to march into Chinatown in Vancouver and start throwing rocks at the windows, the houses, businesses, and the people of Chinatown. Well, the Chinese fought back the best they could, but everyone went indoors and just kind of stayed inside and tried to protect their businesses, their homes, their families. Word got around to Japantown. So the Japanese people in Japantown heard about what was going on in Chinatown. They were preparing for war. They stocked up on weapons and knives and glass bottles. So when the AEL started marching into Japantown, Japan was the first to retaliate before they could even respond. And they started throwing glass bottles at them, coming at them with broken bottles and knives, and chasing the AEL off.
Wow.
And so they're the real heroes in this story.
That doesn't happen often.
It doesn't.
But they were going off that high of being like a superpower and kicking everybody's butt in wars, right?
Probably, yeah. I think they had a little bit more confidence and they didn't want to be messed with. And they heard what was happening to the Chinese people. They knew they were next. And so they retaliated, which you do. It's what you do. And actually it worked very well for them. You know, of course, a few Japanese people got hit in the head with rocks, but then again, so did the white people from the AEL.
So how many people died?
0 people died.
Wow.
Yeah, that's a beautiful thing about this story. It's a little bit more positive. Of course, it's still negative. There's lots of hate, but they were able to come back. They were able to bounce back from this.
Oh, so they weren't scared off.
No, they weren't. Now, of course, there was no more Asian people coming in because of the head taxes, but still, as a community, they were able to grow and proceed and progress. So the good news is there were no deaths from this, but the racial tension was still there. Anyone who identified themselves as white or British Canadians, they still had this hate towards anyone who's non-white. And that goes for the Asians and even the native people that were there. In the following months, neither the people of Vancouver nor the government would try to stop any racism or even punish the people who promoted hatred against these people. Instead, it responded by limiting immigration from Asia and the head tax, of course. So couldn't say it's a happy ending, but wasn't too tragic.
Unlike 1906.
Exactly. And the good thing about that is now Vancouver, they take a lot of pride in their multiculturalism.
Oh, okay.
Which makes Vancouver a beautiful place to be now. So that's my story.
Let's see what else happened in 1907. On July 30th, Russia and Japan signed an agreement guaranteeing freedom of China while recognizing each other's special interests.
In Kingston, Jamaica, they had an earthquake which killed 800 to 1,000 people.
On August 1st, Bank of Italy, later Bank of America, opens its first branch on 3433 Mission Street in San Francisco.
The largest sailing ship ever built, the 7-masted Thomas W. Lawson, is wrecked in the Isles of Sicily.
The French bombard Casablanca and land troops to occupy the Atlantic coast region of Morocco after attacks on foreigners.
The first ever ball drop is held in Times Square, New York City.
And we'll end it on that. We'll see you in 1908.
See you then.
Bye.
Bye.